Okay, it's a pleasure for me and for all of us to interview our beloved Professor James O. Berger or Jim Berger. My first question is like all your college degree were from Cornell University, and you finished your bachelor's to PhD degrees within 6 years. This is very impressive. How did that happen? And how did you get interested in statistics?
Well, let me first start by saying that I'm very delighted to be interviewed by these three people. They were all my students. So they probably know where some of the skeletons are buried, but we'll probably won't go into that today. So Cornell in the 1960s, not Cornell, the Ford Foundation initiated a program that they called the 6-year PhD program. And the idea was to see if people could get a PhD within 6 years from graduation from high school. And I was, I think, in the second cohort of that program. And yes, I got a PhD. It was kind of a confusing time, however, in the sense that when I first got to, one of the ways you could move fast through the degrees at Cornell was most of the requirements were waived. Curiously, the only requirement that was not waived was a requirement that every semester you had to take physical education. I'm not sure how that helped getting a PhD in 6 years, but that was what it was. Anyway, the first semester I decided I was going to get my PhD in economics. So all I took was economics courses, all the undergrad and a graduate economics class. And then over the Christmas break, I decided, no, I don't want to do that. That's too remote. So I wanted to become an MD PhD. So the second semester, all I took was chemistry and biology. And then that summer, I thought back to my first year and said, what did you like? And I said, well, I only really liked the mathematics in all of those courses. So then I switched to a math major and went through and got my PhD. I was lucky enough to get into statistics because at that time, kind of the two most famous people in the math department were statisticians, Jack Wolfowitz and Jack Kiefer. They were both members of the National Academy of Science, among the most famous people in the profession. And so I was taking courses from them, and they were really interesting, and it looked statistics. And so I quickly gravitated towards statistics as a degree. And then my actual thesis advisor was Larry Brown. So I got my PhD under him.
Hello.
Talk close.
Okay. Hello. That's good, right? Okay. So, Jim, you have been elected to the U.S. National Academy of Science in 2003. How does this role shape your research and influence your professional activities afterwards?
Well, I mean, the National Academy of Science doesn't itself do any research. And so being elected to the Academy did not change my research at all. What it did is I got put on a lot more committees. The National Research Council is kind of the research arm of the NAS and has lots of committees who are studying different aspects of research. I was on a lot of those committees, and I got put on a lot of National Science Foundation committees, and they were all interesting. Probably the most interesting was the last one I got on, and then I just quit the whole business of committees. The National Science Foundation has a directorate of mathematics and physical sciences that includes math, chemistry, astronomy, physics, and material science. And that directorate has an advisory committee, and I ended up chairing that advisory committee from I don't know, when was it, 2010 to 2013. And that was very interesting because I got to see what was going on in all the other sciences. Like one thing I discovered is that all those other scientists, like half of what they did was statistics. I mean, astronomy, it was probably 3/4 of what they did was statistics. And I sort of noticed that there were no statisticians, or very few statisticians, working in those areas. And I in my role as chair could bring up things, and so I could point out that this is very different from, say, medicine, where to do research in medicine you have to have statisticians embedded in the research groups. And so they were all kind of keen on that particular idea of possibly embedding statisticians in the research groups until they found out how much money we made. Basically, a statistics postdoc was paid 3 times as much as an astronomy postdoc, and so they couldn't afford statisticians. And then the other part of that experience that I found a little frustrating was when big data came along in about 2013, and I was lobbying hard to get this Directorate of Math and Physical Sciences to grab a large piece of the pie of big data money. And we didn't get it. It mostly went to Computer Science Directorate, which I found frustrating. But all you can do is try.
So, Jim, you have received the Fisher Award and lectureship from COPS in 2001, the World Memorial Award and the lectureship from IMS in 2007, and the World Memorial Award from AMS in 2015, and the Arnold Zeller Medal from ISPA in 2018. Adding on receiving the COPS Presidential Award, they are all the most prestigious awards that a statistician can receive in their profession. So what do you think are the most important parts to make your career so successful?
So these are very different awards. The R.A. Fisher, the Wald. No, what am I forgetting? The Wilkes Memorial Award is kind of for overall contributions to statistics throughout your life, to not just research but teaching, service to the societies, editorial stuff. Everything kind of figures into the Wilkes Award, and I always believed in contributing as much as I could everywhere in statistics. But still, it was a delight to get that reward. The ISBA award was much the same. I was one of the people who helped grow ISBA, founded it and helped it grow, and so that was acknowledging my efforts in the birth of ISBA. That was the Arnold Zellner Award. The other three, the Fisher Lecturer, the COPS Award, and the what was the other one?
COPS Presidential Award.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And Wilkes.
Oh, and the Wald Award. Yeah, so the Fisher, the COPS, and the Wald things were, primarily research based. Although the Fisher and the Wald Memorial Lecture, they actually pay attention to whether the person can lecture or not. These are supposed to be very popular lectures, highly attended, and so if you're a terrible speaker, you might not get one of these things, and luckily by the time I got these, my lecturing had improved. So I will tell you how terrible a lecturer I was when I started out. I went to a university to give a lecture when I was maybe 5 years after my PhD, and my lecturing style then was to face the blackboard, write on the blackboard, and mumble. No, this is a lecture at another university. I I'm not going to mention the university, even though it's quite close to here, because of because well, you'll see why. So I'm giving the lecture, looking the other way, and then suddenly I hear a noise, a kind of a funny noise, back in the audience, and I said, that sounded like a snore, and I turned around, and everybody in the audience was asleep. Every single person. Now, this particular place before this particular lecture had a tradition that before colloquiums, they would cover this huge round table they had with glasses of champagne. And so everybody, including me, had plentiful champagne before the lecture. But still, I'm the only one I know that sent every single member of an audience to sleep. But I mean, then I got better, and I finally realized that there's kind of no point in lecturing or giving a talk unless people can understand it. So ever since then, I've focused on being understandable, and I think that helped me with getting the Fisher and the Wald awards.
You were at Purdue. You were at Purdue from 1974 until 1997. How did that come about, and who were the statisticians that strongly influenced you in the early, say, first 10 years?
So in about November or October of 1973, I more or less had my thesis done, and I walked up to my advisor, who was Larry Brown, and said, this is mostly done. Can I graduate and go get a job? I had a wife and a child at that point of time, and I really wanted a paycheck, a decent paycheck. So I asked Larry if I could go out and get a job starting in January. And he said, sure, that's fine with me. So I wrote around to quite a number of schools, and most of them just kind of responded politely saying, well, we'd be delighted if you apply for a job starting in fall of 1974, just like normal. Except one person, one school, did not say that. Shanti Gupta at Purdue went to the dean and said, look, let's get this guy. And so they offered me a job starting in January, and I was delighted. Purdue was a great place, and I took it. Now, I contrast that whole process with the employment situation today. So, number one, I never went for an interview. Number two, I never even sent in a formal application. It was just kind of, I don't know, things could happen back in those days that way. They don't happen that way now, which is probably good, because some of that was a little bit of the old boy network stuff. Anyway, so I got to Purdue then, and Shanti stayed incredibly important in my life at Purdue. He was someone who really made us love Purdue. Herman Rubin was a great influence on me when I arrived. Herman Rubin is by far, or was by far, the smartest person I ever met, and he was a diehard Bayesian. So when I got there, I wasn't a Bayesian, but I kind of, when I realized how smart he was and that he was a diehard Bayesian, I kind of started thinking, well, there must be something there. I should look into this. And so I did start looking into it. Many other people there were very influential. One of the problems with my abbreviated path to a PhD was I didn't have a lot of stat courses, like I never had a multivariate statistics course. And luckily, next to my office at Purdue was Leon Glaser, who was one of the multivariate gurus of the time. And so I could just bop into his office anytime I needed help. And I got help from a lot of other people there. So it was a great place for me to start and to develop as a statistician.
And I when I was a student,
I'm still glad you're using the book here. my daughters have since the beginning of the book gotten all the royalties. Now my grandchildren, and they're very happy when I'll tell them to send a thank you letter to UConn for still using it. So Statistical Decision Theory, this was a book that was published in 1980, came about because there were some, on the frequentist side, there were quite theoretical and difficult to read books on decision theory. And then there were some easy to read Bayesian books on decision theory, but they were only Bayesian. And so I set out at the time to write a book that was, I thought, going to be easy to read and cover both classical and Bayesian decision theory. And so I wrote that book, and that book came out in 1980. While I was writing that book, one of the things about writing a book is it really makes you read the literature. And so for the first time, I really started reading the Bayesian literature, and I found, gosh, a lot of this makes sense. And so by the time the book appeared in 1980, I had actually more or less become a Bayesian, which was a problem because my book just came out and I don't really believe it anymore because so then luckily I had a chance a few years later to write a second edition, and the second edition I kept all the non-Bayesian stuff in, but I added a lot more Bayesian stuff, and this became, I think, the version of the book that you're talking about using here, Statistical Decision Theory and Bayesian Analysis. One of the interesting, we've been talking about the Bayesian frequentist dynamic. Back then, there was much more antagonism between Bayesians and frequentists than there is today. And I got a curious call after the second edition came out from my publisher, and the publisher said, Jim, I don't know how to say this, but I'm getting lots and lots of requests to reprint the first edition. And I said, go ahead, I don't care. But I think they talked it over and decided no, they were not going to reprint the first edition. Then the likelihood principle. Okay, now, so one of the articles that one of the things that I read that had the most profound effect on me in this phase of writing the 1980 book was Alan Birnbaum's proof of the likelihood principle. This had a huge impact on me because what Alan Birnbaum showed, at the time, everybody believed in the sufficiency principle, and almost everybody believed in what Cox had formulated as the conditionality principle, David Cox. And then Alan Birnbaum proved that those two principles logically imply the likelihood principle, which nobody believed except Bayesians. So this caused it had a huge effect on me, and it caused a huge uproar in the statistical community with many people writing counter-arguments, counter-examples to Birnbaum's proof, even though it's just a simple proof. You can't have a counter-example. And there's a big literature I read all about this. Everybody weighed in with their favorite counterexample. And finally I said, I just want to write something that summarizes this whole literature. And that's where the book, The Likelihood Principle, which I wrote with Robert Wolpert, that's how it came about. It was an attempt to summarize, I think that came out in 1988 or something. And that was an attempt to summarize this whole literature before that.
So you moved to Duke in 1997. How did that come about? This also seemed to correspond to a shift in your research from primarily theory to more methodology research and interdisciplinary research. What have motivated you for this shift?
Well, so we left Purdue in 1997, and it was just a time of change. Our kids had gone off to college, and Purdue is in West Lafayette, Indiana, which is a very kind of small place. And the kids were going off to college, then they'd be going off to jobs. And it was very unlikely they were ever going to come back to West Lafayette. At the same time, I had been getting involved in interdisciplinary research and Bayesian computation, and I finally decided I needed to shift my research much more heavily in that direction. And at the time, Duke University was by far the hotbed of interdisciplinary research and computational research involving Bayesian analysis. So moved to Duke and had a great time there.
Jim, during your career, you established many collaborators and collaborations with industry. For example, pharmaceutical companies, auto industries, Ford and GM in particular, and so on. How does one make the interaction between academy and industry work so that it is rewarding in both directions?
So to be, it's always good to do interdisciplinary stuff from the sense of you're showing that theory and methodology can be useful. And that just generally, when I started doing interdisciplinary stuff, I was mostly a theorist or methodologist. And so I was going, look, this stuff can be useful. And that was part of the motivation. But a stronger part of the motivation was that I was looking for really interesting problems that I could bring back to statistics and do new theory and methodology with. So that was my primary focus, was bringing that back. When I started working with industry, I had only one primary way of dealing with them, which is I said, tell me your problems and I will try to solve them. I wasn't going to get money from an industry and view it as kind of a personal grant to do my own research. I would simply focus everything on trying to solve their problem. Sometimes that didn't work. Sometimes the problem couldn't be solved. Sometimes the problem was formulated. But most of the time, I was actually able to solve their problem. And I think that's an important thing to do when approaching interaction with industry.
India, Korea, Saudi, etc. So how those international departments or visits help you make your research to be more influential?
Some of these appointments had educational components. I would give courses or short courses or stuff like that, which I think were helpful. But mostly, I just wanted to go places and collaborate with people. So I established many enduring collaborations, I think especially with people in Spain and Italy. Now, it didn't hurt that Spain and Italy are really great places to visit. But I loved those collaborations. Many of them went on throughout my entire life. And I think they were very fruitful both for my own research and in developing the statistics research in the other countries. So that was my focus.
Hi, Jim. In the middle 90s, you become increasingly involved in administrative responsibility, like serving as president of IMS, co-editor of Annals of Statistics. In addition, you serve as the chair of the section of Bayesian Statistics Science of the ASA. In 1995, president of ISPA in 2004, and chairing the advisory committee for the NSF Directorate on MPS in 2010 to 2013. How did you make use of these opportunities?
Sort of most of these were service roles, just doing what I thought was necessary to help advance the profession. The ones that had kind of immediate return to me of benefit were the editorial things. When you edit a journal, you suddenly expand your horizon enormously in terms of reading papers you never read before. You get exposed to how the field is moving, what new directions are. So editing a journal is an incredible amount of work, but it's really rewarding in terms of re-engaging with the field. We all tend to tunnel a bit much, and editing a journal is the best way to untunnel.
You were instrumental in the formation of SAMC as the founder and director of SAMC, serving from 2002 to 2010. Can you tell us some major highlights of SAMC during your time and how they helped shape interdisciplinary field?
SAMC was fascinating, but it was a huge enterprise, and I mean I can't cover what it did because it had, during the 8 years I was there, it had I think 24 research programs, ranging from month-long programs in the summer to full academic year research programs. I mean, just to give you some feel, I went up and looked up the data on just one of the programs. So in 2006, 2007, SAMC had a year-long program entitled Development, Assessment, and Utilization of Complex Computer Models. Today that's called UQ, or Uncertainty Quantification. Susie Bayari, one of my collaborators from Spain, was the overall leader. So this is one program, but to get a scope for the size of it, it had 30 long-term research visitors, conducted 11 workshops, taught 2 courses, had 10 full-time graduate students, 7 postdocs, and involved dozens of faculty from the Research Triangle through teaching releases. This was 1 out of 23 projects. So the scope of what was done at SAMC in terms of changing, entire disciplines was pretty dramatic. When we had the SAMC unfortunately closed a couple of years ago, but we had a closing ceremony where lots of people came in and recounted how SAMC had changed not only their life, but the nature of research in their particular discipline.
So, Jim, you have supervised so many PhD students, including 3 of us sitting here today. So what were your most successful supervising strategy, and what do you feel is the right mix of research, teaching, and leadership development for graduate students? Could you also share some memorable moments with your students?
Well, so I'd have to give 38 highlights with my 38 students. So I'm not going to do that. With my students, I basically just started out trying to ask them, what do you want? Do you want to do theory, methodology, applications, a mix of both? How fast do you want to graduate? Because of my background, I was very conscious of that question. And some said, I just like it here. I never want to graduate. And some wanted to get out in 3 or 4 years. And so I would then try to adapt the program to what they wanted. I don't recall ever focusing on leadership. I don't think that was an issue back then. Research came number 1, teaching came number 2, and I don't recall ever talking to my students about leadership, sorry.
But I think you have several students be department chair of the work.
Yes, they became great leaders, but that was themselves. I had nothing to do with them becoming great leaders. I feel like a real dinosaur in answering this question, because one of the reasons I retired in 1970 was so that I would not have to deal with these issues, which are really complex. I mean, I think I commented earlier to a question. I said, I think statistics is here to stay in traditional areas, and I think statistics can also try to bring law and order to some of the things like data science.
Thanks, Jim. And then my last question. How do you enjoy your retirement life? Any interesting story do you want to share with us?
Well, yeah, retirement's been great. I mean, I continued finishing. I have a number of papers I have to finish. I had 3 book projects going on, one of which we just finished last month. This is on objective Bayesian inference with Jose Bernardo and Dongshu Sun. Curiously, that book took 26 years to write. We started it in 1997 and finally only finished it last September. I have 2 other books, one on Bayesian model uncertainty and one on uncertainty quantification that I'm currently working on, and that will be the bulk of my retirement. And I was thinking, I hope those don't take 26 years to write, but then I thought, well, wait a minute. If they take 26 years to finish, I'll be 99, and this is not all bad.
Thank you again for all the audience and for participation, and Jim and my other colleagues for this helpful discussion. Hope it will be useful for next generation of statisticians. Thank you.
And thank you for formulating the nice questions and participating. Okay. Questions from the audience?
Anybody has any question to Jim?
Hi, Joe Capillari, Pfizer. I was at a conference with Frank Rockhold, who has been on the faculty at Duke. Frank spent about 40 years at Eli Lilly, Merck, and especially GlaxoSmithKline, and now he's been a professor at Duke. The hotbed of activity is still alive and well. Did you work with scholars and researchers like Frank or others in biostatistics, more the applied realm at Duke?
I'm sure I have, but part of my problems by the time I got to Duke, I mean, it's a nice problem, is that I just traveled way too much. So it was somehow easier for me to strike up collaborations with people not at Duke than at Duke. So I talked about all these collaborations I had all around the world at that time, but I didn't have that many at Duke. I did write some papers with people at Duke.
This is more of a, it seems you touched many different areas of statistics. I'm just curious, what were what were your favorite books that you really inspired you over the time?
I think it was more papers, like the Birnbaum paper I talked about, than books. I mean, there were some books I loved. Maury, I mean, I completely read Maury de Groot's book on applied Bayesian decision theory, and that was a wonderful book. And he is a delightful writer, amusing style. So I mean, that certainly affected me. I mean, a lot of books, and many of the classic books were great. So I
So Jim, I want to ask you about your involvement with the Best Friend Forever group. So Bayesian fiducial inference frequentists. I think I want to just ask you about your view of the future of scientific inference, whether there's any, development in that area.
Well, so this BFF group, Bayes, Frequentists, and Fiducial, started, I don't know, 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, and we meet every year. And a third of the people are Bayesians, a third are frequentists, and a third are fiducialists. And ideally, although the conferences always diverge and go to all sorts of directions, but ideally we kind of focus on how we more or less say the same things from different perspectives. That's, I'd say, the original focus of the meetings. You know, so a frequentist using what they call confidence distributions, a Bayesian using an objective posterior distribution, and a fiducialist producing what they call a fiducial distribution. For many problems, those three things look almost exactly the same, which is very interesting.
Thank you. I think for the interest of time, we have to stop this and move to the next.
The word presentation. And I also would like to recognize members from the organizing committee, Dr. Day, Dr. Barr, and Dr. Schifano. Please join us. On behalf of our sponsors and guests, we would like to present you this. We would like to first thank you for your inspirational remarks, and then we would like to present you this plaque in recognition of your remarkable contribution to our field. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Berger, and our speakers, and also thanks to our sponsors, Pfizer, ASA, and Yukon, for making this event possible. And thank you all for coming. We hope to see you again next year.